Hi, Dana.
Oh, hi, Lawrence.
How you
Ooh,
doing?
is this going to be that kind of a podcast?
No, no,
It's not.
absolutely not.
Ew.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody, to GenXy, the podcast. I'm Lawrence Winterman.
And I'm Dana Dubois.
Yes, she is. And let's just jump right in. Let's get started for this week.
Yeah, let's jump in. What's like your theme of the week, Lawrence? What's been going on with you?
My theme of the week is rants or outrage. I've recorded a couple short podcasts to share with the world about how pissed off I am at Chuck Schumer and the Democrats for not standing up and fighting back the way that I think they should. So, yeah, that's my theme for the week. How about you?
I watched them and felt all your righteous indignation as I restacked them. They were great. I can't believe you were
Thanks.
that eloquent on the fly in a rage.
When you rant something over and over in your head a million
Hmm.
times, it's easy to just say it to a camera live.
They were excellent. My theme of the week, Lawrence, is podcasts. How meta is
Oh,
that?
yeah, that's pretty appropriate.
In addition to this one, I'm recording two other podcasts this weekend. The first one was last night, and it was with Blue Planet Stories. Igor and Alex were fabulous. They live on a boat, Lawrence, their sailboat, and
Cool.
they are living the life and they're interviewing different storytellers. I'm so honored. They asked they're in or near Panama right now, so it was a thrill on a cold Seattle night to be chatting with them. It's going to air either next Sunday or the Sunday after that, and I'm excited. I will definitely share it on Substack. And right after we talk, I am going to be on another podcast. It's not yet launched, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed to disclose the title.
Okay.
But this is kind of a dream come true. I am a Leo who loves being on a microphone. So, any of you out there,
What
what,
are
right?
you?
Are you shocked to learn this about me, Lawrence?
My longtime friend Dana loves being the center of attention. I had no idea.
I certainly love talking into a microphone or singing into a microphone. So, if you have any karaoke nights or podcasts and you need company, I'm right here. Come find me.
Hey, everybody, she's not joking. She will show up to any karaoke night anywhere in the world.
If you fly me there, I will. This might be a thing. Would someone fly me to go to a karaoke night?
I think we have a new podcast idea, or it's just a recurring bit on this one.
Sure, I'm open to offers. Leave them in the comments. Should we jump into our real theme for this week?
Let's do it.
What are we going to be
So,
talking about this week, Lawrence?
who am I? Why am I here?
I think maybe we need to retake that.
On the
I don't know why that's
who
so
am
funny.
I? Why am I here?
Oh, okay, sure. That's why we're talking origin stories. I was thinking more origin of being a writer. Although maybe we can use some of that because it was very funny. What do we really want to say about origin stories? I think talking about being new on Substack. We're both new on Substack.
Yeah.
I've been writing online for almost 2 years now, mostly on Medium. Lawrence is a brilliant writer who is finally sharing his words with the world. But both being new to Substack, we are experiencing that really awkward and challenging feeling of being new, posting into what feels like a void, hoping to start gather a readership. And we see a lot of other folks out there posting in the notes on Substack about looking for their people and hoping to get a response. So if that's you, this episode is for
What?
you. What? Hi. Drop a hello in here, and we'll come restack all your things. Say hello. But today we want to talk about the stories that have kind of started it all, so to speak. Lawrence's is a story that he wrote over a year ago, but just shared with the world last week. Mine is a story I wrote on Medium almost 2 years ago that really launched me as a writer, that I also just shared on Substack this week. Lawrence, you just posted your story, I Love You, Dieter Murphy. It's on Substack, it's on Medium. The link is in the story of this podcast page on Substack. This is a beautiful story.
Thank
Queer
you.
dystopian science fiction is not my usual beat as a writer or an editor. I found this story so universal both heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. I know some of this is because I've known you so long that I remember Dieter Murphy, but I think there are universal truths in this story that anyone reading it will find relatable. So I'd like to just ask you a few questions about it.
Absolutely.
I want to start with tell us who Peter Murphy is. He was the lead singer of Bauhaus, so cut that out.
Right. Right.
Blooper
Yeah,
reel.
so he was,
A goth.
I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead.
And Dieter Murphy is in fact dead.
Peter Murphy is dead. We should kind of leave this in.
My gosh. Dieter Murphy's dead. Sorry, that's not funny. He's a real person. I did not mean to do that. The virginal brides are finally past his tomb. I have to wipe my eyes for real because I'm crying so hard. How did I do that, Lawrence? I don't know. I have
Hey,
never
it,
once, when reading this, thought of Peter Murphy, but those core musical memories. Losing my voice, I'm laughing so hard. Let me get more somber because this is a somber topic. Lawrence, tell us who Dieter Murphy is and the origins of your origin story.
Dieter Murphy was a real person. He was half German, half Irish from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and he was the manager of the Walden Books bookstore that I got a job at the day after my 16th birthday, and he was the first openly gay man that I had ever met. This story is my origin story, not just because it's about Dieter Murphy and reflecting on the relationship I had with him as a mentor, unbeknownst to him, but also because it's my first foray into writing queer sci-fi dystopias, which is very much my jam. For some reason, through science fiction, everything is more accessible to me. It's a genre I've been reading since I was a kid. It's just sort of part and parcel of who I am. And so when I think about stories and storytelling, it's often through a science fiction kind of lens. This is a great way for me to access my emotions around Dieter and his passing, and also write a science fiction story to, do the thing I've always wanted to do, which is to be a science fiction writer.
Who was Dieter to you? Was he a crush? Was he a mentor? What did he represent?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think that I would have known how to answer that question when I was, 16 or 17 or 18. I thought of Dieter as a friend. I thought of him as a colleague. Dieter was a great guy. And even though I'm pretty sure he knew that I was gay, he never said anything to me. He never asked me. He never hit on me. He just kind of taught me by being an open gay man and answered any ridiculous question that I had. Sometimes there would be evenings where several of us would be working and we'd have questions about his life, and he would just answer them in a very truthful way that was probably the most honest kind of interaction I'd really had with somebody about sex and sexuality up until that point.
So, did you have a crush on him?
In retrospect, I can look back at the age of 55 and realize that I loved him, but it wasn't a crush. The day that he told me that he was leaving to move to a different store, I burst into tears and quit
Oh,
and said, if you're not here, I don't want to be here, which feels like very crush like behavior, but it wasn't. I've always had this theory, and we've talked about this, that when you're meeting people who are going to be lifelong friends, you kind of fall in love with them a little bit. Falling in love isn't just with romantic partners, it's also with people that you resonate with emotionally and intellectually. Dieter and I absolutely resonated intellectually. I think I fell in love with him as a friend, but that's not a thing that I could have ever admitted until now.
did you know you were gay at this time?
I think I've known that I was gay since I was 5 or 6, even though I didn't have the words at that time. My mom asked me once, have you ever wondered, oh my God, what if I'm gay? And I answered on a total technicality. And I said, no, definitively, because
You'd
I
never
was not
wondered.
at that point in my life wondering if I was gay. I was thinking, holy fuck, why am I gay?
I asked that question because I didn't know you were gay. You didn't come out to me for years, and I would champion that you were not gay. When people would say you were, I was like, no, man, Lawrence just hasn't met the right girl.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to shift topics a bit and say, even in the throes of this dystopian world you've created, music is a key narrative device in your story. What did the music in your story represent, and how is it effective to move the narrative forward?
That's a really good question.
Thank
I
you.
think
You
it
know,
serves
I'm
a
going to.
couple of purposes. Right. I know you're going to ask the music question.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you caught it because it was, in writing the story, the music was very important to me. And I think it serves a couple of purposes, right? Like, one is it's a very effective way of setting the time and the place. And
Mhm.
when I was writing the story, I came upon the part where they hear Madonna's Like a Prayer. And
Yeah.
as I was writing that part, I had this very visceral recollection of getting that CD, the fact that it smelled like patchouli, and the fact that it was ubiquitous. Like for the time, the weeks or months when that came out, you could smell patchouli everywhere, and everyone was playing the songs off of that album. So I thought it was a very just viscerally grounding moment in time. I
Yeah.
admit I did the research. That was the first song that came to me. And when I looked it up online, it was actually the moment in the story from a timeline point of view where that,
Oh,
that song was kind of most popular. And then what I hope readers caught were the references to more modern music like Chappell Roan's Pink Pony Club, because it is such a natural gay anthem. When I was writing the story, I didn't originally have that because that song hadn't come out yet. And on a later revision, I added it in because, of course, if I were really visiting 1989 and talking to Dieter, how could I not mention Pink Pony Club as kind of being
right.
emblematic of the music that comes next and a song that he would have loved and would have wanted to go out dancing to? And then the third way that I reference music there is I talk about Beyonce, who I love and whose music I love. And I imagined a future wherein she had written her last album. And in this dystopia, which is paralleling current events too freakishly for me to be comfortable with, the idea that she writes an album that has a song on it called Anthem that is about America and about how black people and queer people and other, anyone who's an other,
Hmm.
are persecuted, and how our lives would be traded away for this kind of whiff of whatever makes America great again. And so, kind of using an imaginary song of hers, and that kind of being the song that gets her exiled, and that exile ending badly, was something that felt musically right and in theme with the story. So yeah, I use music a lot to kind of set the theme and the pace and kind of the centering of the story.
I noticed, and your picks were Like a Prayer, arguably her best song. I love Like a Prayer, and I think that given that he's dying, it's the perfect song. It's everything about it's perfect, and of course, Pink Pony Club. Madonna ran so Chapel Rowan could dance in her high heels at the Pink Pony Club.
Yeah, yeah.
Here's a question that really stuck with me in reading this story. Why did young Lawrence not go see Dieter at the hospital? And why did fictional Lawrence choose to visit him in this story?
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of flip those around. Fictional Lawrence had no choice. I try to create a world in the story where it's clear that older fictional Lawrence is living in this dystopia where there is a global pandemic, airborne AIDS, and it's crucial to find a cure for that. Not only does the technology exist, but this emotional entanglement, this quantum emotional entanglement exists so that Lawrence is one of the few people who can go back and visit somebody who actually had AIDS and HIV. Young Lawrence didn't go visit Dieter in the story or in reality because I was scared. The idea of going to say goodbye to somebody who's dying of AIDS was so terrifying to me as a 19-year-old that I chickened out and did not go see him in the hospital before he died. That obviously has stuck with me forever. In some ways, is a fundamental piece of who I am and who I am trying to become. It's a fundamental piece of my exploration about myself and my values and what I would and wouldn't do. I'm not proud that I didn't go see him. I regret it. And I would love the chance to make that up to him. And I feel like writing the story is a way to try to make that up to him. Dieter Murphy was a real human, and I loved him, and I want everybody to know his name. I want people to know that he was a real person who was so smart and so full of life and taught me so much. And this feels like, in absence of doing the right thing when I was 19, this is a way to do the right thing now.
That's what the story felt like to me. It felt like writing a decades old wrong, and I think you did it beautifully. Thank you so much, and I think everybody should go read this story. The link is in the description. Oh, Lawrence, I wish I could hug you. I'm podcast hugging
Well,
you.
this
Look,
is why we're doing this, right?
I'm
I mean,
podcast hugging you.
podcast hug.
Pod-
Yeah, I mean, this is why we're writers. I think both of us write from a soul level, from a place in our hearts as a way to explore and express things that we're uniquely able to express through writing and through words. So,
Yeah,
thanks.
of course. You're right, Lawrence. That is why we write. And I coined this term called memoir dust. I discovered early on when I was writing that in order to really write about something from the past, it's a very basic metaphor, but you have to dig it up and you have to really excavate everything about it. I thought of the term when I wrote a story about my grandparents. My grandmother died in 1996 and my grandfather died in 2010. So they are long gone. But I wrote a story about going to this restaurant called the Rascal House with them. Do you remember the Rascal House in South Florida?
Yeah,
Old
of
Jewish
course.
diner, delicious place.
Yeah.
And I was writing for a writing prompt about my grandmother's cooking. And my grandmother never cooked. She retired from cooking. We always went there. After I wrote this story, it was like I could smell the pickles. I could hear my grandfather's gravelly voice and the razor stubble on his cheeks, the way my grandmother would call me Bubala, like they were there with me for days. I was like, I'm coated in memoir dust. I excavated so many memories that I felt like I could call them and talk to them. They felt so immediate, and I haven't felt that way about them in years. And it was both wonderful to revisit them and also kind of sad to be like they've been for decades. I'm guessing that you have been very coated in memoir dust in the process of writing the story and now talking about it.
If I could share one more thing,
Always.
um, there's a moment in the story that is real. In the story, he opens his eyes, and I have this awareness, this sudden recollection his eyes are green and not blue. And that actually happened as I was writing the story.
Oh,
I have for years remembered him as having blue eyes. And as I was writing that scene, I saw him open his eyes and look at me, and he had green eyes. I don't know how I thought he had blue eyes. He absolutely had green eyes. I totally get what you're talking about. I had that moment in writing this story, and, in the interactions talking about music with him, had imaginary conversations in my head with Dieter about music and dancing. And yeah, I get it. Memoir dust, I think, is a great term. I absolutely came away from writing the story covered in memoir dust.
I'm glad it resonated with you too, Lawrence. I had a feeling
Yeah.
it might.
Let's talk about your origin story, shall we?
We shall.
So, A couple of years ago, you wrote this story called What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting a Gender Nonconforming Child.
Mhm.
And it's subtitled as Five Things Every Parent Should Do When Their Kid Comes Out. And this was your big origin story, your initial foray into memoir writing. One of the things that really stuck with me from the story was the moment where your child, Nico, hands you the note talking about this change they want you to know about. And I was wondering, just from a starting point for this conversation, what was it like for you in that moment when Nico handed you that note?
I've thought about that moment so many times. I'm trying to dig the memoir dust back up and remember what it was like. I was sitting right here because it was during the pandemic. We were all working and schooling from home. And this is my dining room slash office. And I suspected, as I wrote in that story, that Nico was considering a gender transformation. A lot of my older daughter's friends were going through this process, and it was all happening in a text thread, and Nico was on it. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to use she, though she went when as she was going through this journey, her pronouns shifted. She is
Right.
a she today. I'm not disrespecting pronouns, I hope. I'm just for clarity of the narrative. I'm remembering it back now. She was telling me about this text thread that I don't think I was supposed to know about. She was the little sister and was so she was telling me about how a lot of these other kids were going through new names, new pronouns. I knew she might be considering it. I was still surprised when she handed it to me. I was a little scared. I didn't quite know how to parent through it. And so I knew this was the start of something that could be really big and challenging, especially during a pandemic, to parent her through. There was an element of doubt. And I think one of the reasons I ended up launching this publication is to say it's not okay to express doubt to your child when they come out to you. It's okay to feel what you're feeling, and you should talk about those feelings with people who aren't your child's going through it. So I will
Right.
certainly admit that was in there. And there was pride that I'd done something right as a mom, that she felt safe coming to me and her truth in that moment. And also her note is cute. I was proud at the tone and the clarity of the note. And I was proud of her certainty at the time, their certainty. They said, I'm not Annika anymore. I'm Nico, and I want they, them pronouns, and I'm gender fluid. And in the wisdom of time now, looking back, I wasn't confused at the time, but I was confused because I didn't understand gender fluid. I thought I
Mm.
did, and I thought it was okay, you're going to be fluid, you're using they, them pronouns. But what Nico was actually asking for was they at the time wanted me to check in every couple of days and ask what gender they were. And I didn't do that because I didn't understand the assignment. And honestly, that would be a hard assignment. And we've talked about it a little since, although not
Yeah.
she she now doesn't really want to talk about that time in her life. But I think the short answer is there were a myriad of emotions, and I think those were some of the top ones.
I remember that moment where you
Yeah,
posted on Facebook Nico's note, and I
at her
remember
request,
celebrating.
at her request, she asked me to
Right?
put it on
Yes,
Facebook.
with consent and specific request from the child. Um, and I remember kind of celebrating them at that moment and their decision, and also maybe feeling a little bit of jealousy because here's a kid who's 11 talking clearly about and just how different that is from our generation and my experience as a queer person. I'm curious for listeners, how far apart in time was that experience where Nico came to you and you writing this article? How much time had passed?
Oh, that's a great question. She came out in March of 2021, and I published that story. I'd have to look, but I believe it was May of
It
2023. By the time I published it, the journey was pretty well done. So it was a look backward. It was not written in the throes of it all happening. And I'm curious what the stories would have looked like if I'd been writing all along. No, because every story is, of course, you're a different narrator if you're writing when it's done versus when you're in the throes of it. I suppose one could
Right.
say I am still in the throes of it. I mean, Nico could come to me tomorrow with a new note and
Right.
say this, and the journey would continue on. But this first part of the adolescent gender exploration that my youngest child went through, I think is a closed story, and it was nearly closed when I first published. That's a great
Yeah.
question.
One of the things I love about it is it comes from a place of generosity, right? Because you are writing the article as a guide to other parents who might be
Yeah.
in the moment of experiencing that coming out of a child. We know the world has changed radically since you wrote the article and since you had that experience with Nico.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering what has changed in you.
Boy, there are a lot of answers to that question, but I will focus on what's changed for me as a writer and publisher of content about gender nonconforming kids. In November, right after the election, that terrible night, I went and found Project 2025 online and I did a control F. It's a very long document. Just looked on the word trans because I wanted to know what I personally, as a writer and publisher, was up against. And I also wanted to know what the broader trans non binary community was up against. And what I found was, I mean, I was scared. And I'm going to paraphrase it because it's been a few months, but essentially it was labeling writing about trans related content as pornography and that pornography could be punishable by prison. Reached out and talked to some fellow writers, and one of them was Melissa Corrigan, who is awesome. She was one of the very first writers on P. Karen pronouns. She has a trans son, and she lives in Virginia, so purple state. But she's written about him eloquently. We had this conversation where we were like, do we need to take down all our content? Are we going to prison if we leave? And more importantly, are our kids in danger? And I really struggled with that for maybe struggled is too hard. I thought about it and ended up writing about it a couple weeks later, saying, I'm not taking anything down and I'm not going to stop writing because I have the privilege of being able to step away from it because it's not my reality. I am a cishet white woman, and my child does not even fall into this category any longer, but I'm not going to leave a vulnerable population behind. I'm not going to obey in advance. I know that expression is being used over and over.
Yep.
It really brought me great comfort as I was making this decision. And so I'm part of me feels like I am running out of things to say because my child is no longer in the throes of it. And I also don't feel like as I can solicit people to be writing about this, parents or LGBTQ folks, because it could be putting them in harm's way. But I'm certainly here to continue sharing these stories. One big shift that happened for me as a writer is if you read my work, you'll see that I have a really measured approach to how I write about this. And I had hoped all along to serve a few purposes. One is to find folks who are like me, who are allies and who would not have a problem with having a trans or non-binary child, but who were facing a sudden shift and were like, what do I do next? And I had a lot of parents write to me, like direct message me, hey, a little so and so was asked for different pronouns. And I'm like, I wanted to find them and assure them with the advice you'll read. That article has 5 points, but I've written many articles about like these are the things that you should do and not do. And they're very measured. And what I've come to learn, and the way I've changed the most as a writer, it is still sound advice for your home and for your personal lived experience with your child. But now I didn't think I could be naive in my 50s about my assumptions in parenting these kids because living in a very blue city, I had the point of view that it wasn't really a brave act to come out because so many of the kids were doing it. It's become such a norm in especially liberal cities. And so my writing is all from this point of view of relative safety that was false. It's crazy to me how tenuous all the progress was and how the the thing I learned that I hate learning is that minorities are always at risk, even
Right.
when it seems like we've made huge progress. I'm lumping myself in there as a woman and as a Jewish person, although I think that there's a hierarchy. I'm certainly not in the most endangered group, but the presumption of safety was astonishingly naive given my years and lived experience. What I'm bringing forth now as a writer is my goal is no longer to be an olive branch and a negotiator with opposition. My goal is to oppose with everything I've got the opposition because you can't find nuance with when the other side is actively trying to do so much harm.
Denying your existence. Yeah.
Denying,
Yeah.
literally erasing. The
Yeah.
website now says LGB. There's no T on the presidential White House focused website around queer folks.
Well, you do acknowledge in the story towards the end, you say that you're kind of writing it from a liberal blue city
Oh yeah.
perspective. How do you now give advice or address? What would you say to people who are in red states and dealing with these issues, given the current political environment, as you've just spoken to eloquently? Everybody is thinking about these issues differently now because there's such a pervasive high level threat from our government. What's your advice?
Move.
The
Honestly,
country?
if you can, or at least to a sanctuary city. I just read that Boston has made a pretty big show of being a sanctuary city. I was thrilled to see that. Place of my
Yeah,
birth, or
Mayor Wu
close.
is a great advocate for GLBT rights and making Boston a sanctuary city. So yeah, big props to her.
Yes. I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but if you have the ability to get out of the country, that is not a bad plan. You are as safe as you can be right now. If you are in a state like Washington, like I am, right after this happened, Seattle Public Schools, my child's high school, sent out mail about ICE and immigration as well as protecting queer kids. Like we're not going to have it. So it's marginally better. We still have a very long way to go, and I don't know for how long those walls can hold. The most recent story I wrote, and it is on Substack and on Medium, and it's also on Parent Map, which is this amazing publication here in Pacific Northwest. Always had been a goal to get published there, so I was so honored when they ran the story. In a weird coincidence, I was in the Seattle Adolescent Care Clinic when that executive order dropped, the first one that was really going after trans kids. And
And so
my
this
daughter,
is the part of the Seattle Children's Hospital that specifically deal with kids who are non-binary or feeling like they might be trans, right?
yes, this is the place where they get care. That is not why my daughter was there. It's a different issue, and she's fine. It was a follow-up appointment, but I happened to be sitting in the lobby by myself because she was in the back with her care team. I watched family after family come in as I was reading these draconian words about mutilation and the harm being done, and watching this clinic handle these kids with so much care at intake, and these parents and these kids who were so united in this the care plan that they were working toward. I'm making assumptions that the kids I saw were there for gender care, but I have to think at least some of them were while I was waiting. And the cognitive dissonance of reading this order, this mandate, and seeing the care these kids were given, it was it was a really emotional moment, and it was wild to be there in that space when it happened. So the last I heard, I believe that they are still providing that care. I think they've pulled back on doing surgeries, which are few and far between. I don't know what will happen. I know that Seattle Children's, which is a wonderful hospital, will not survive without government funding. So if that's what's on the line, know how well they will be able to continue to provide this high level of care that they provide. Walking down the street here, your kid isn't in the same kind of danger as they would be in a red state. But the kinds of conversations that I'm recommending in my previous articles now feel very naive, and they're missing the element of you need to talk to your kids about safety. Your kids may need to take some self-defense classes, and your kids may need to get an understanding of where do I need to code switch? Where is the line
Right.
between how authentically you want to live and not wanting to get the shit beaten out of you or die?
Right. Ugh.
And I ache that this is our reality. That's the advice that we need to give going forward. But I have one of my mom friends. I've known her child, her child and my child went to preschool together. We've known them forever. And this child is trans and is her son. And I was asking, you know, how is he taking it? Her answer was he's just burying his head in the sand like an ostrich. I was like, totally understand that. You need to provide that comfort, but also like you need to talk to him. So I was like, what bathrooms is he using? And she was like, he's using the men's room. I would be very scared to send this 17-year-old into a men's room in a lot of places in the country.
Right.
And I hate that we have to have those conversations now, but I think we do. Our kids'
I think
safety
you're
depends
right.
on it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, the speaking of Gen X broadly, right? Because this is what we're doing a podcast about, but it feels
Mm-hmm.
like a very Matthew Shepard moment to me. And
Mm-hmm.
God willing, that is not the case for any child, but just sort of the terror of being alone and presuming safety and then having an earth shatteringly bad experience because maybe we as queer people aren't prepared to handle the situation that we find ourselves in. That's scary that it's
Right?
the new reality that we're living in.
Lawrence, this is making me think about being Gen X and knowing that as a gay man that we lost the whole generation of gay men before yours. I feel like we should dive into this in a future podcast.
I believe me, I have many, many thoughts about this. I would love to talk about it in a future podcast because Gen X is the generation that, exactly like you said, lost the gay men right before us. And the generations younger than us, in some ways, don't even remember
Nope.
the AIDS pandemic when it was a pandemic. And,
Yeah.
you know, we should talk about it more. But
Okay.
my final question about your article. So we're talking about origin stories, and this article is your writerly origin story. How did writing this and publishing this change you as a writer?
Ooh.
Because when I read this and when I read some of your newer stuff, the data-ness is still there. Like it's still you, but it's evolved as a writer. So I want to hear about that.
Writing this story became like magic. I wrote this when I was brand new at Medium, sort of like I'm brand new at Substack. I'd written a couple things. I didn't know anybody at Medium. And I pitched it to a publication called Age of Empathy. It was my first time. I was really nervous. And the editor, Arpad, who got the story, was going through something really similar. He was like, I think your story is extraordinary. And he passed it on to the main editor, Chris. Hi, Chris. He's also amazing. I found my people at Medium. I ended up becoming an editor for Age of Empathy and The Memoirist. They're tied hand in hand. I found my people. The story got boosted. It was the brand new boost program. And so hundreds and hundreds of people read this story. And I suddenly had a community and I had a readership. So the impact of this story in terms of being found cannot be overstated. It was great. As a writer, this was a first time combining a story of memoir and cultural commentary. This has very much become the way I write. I know I'm not the only writer who writes like this, but it has become my primary means of expression, writing, processing what's going on with me, and contextualizing it in the broader world. So, yeah, the story was first. And when I went back and reread it to put it on Substack, I cringed a little. I was like, all the headings, and it's a little cutesy with its like, I'm not talking to you. I
Right.
am no longer, my tone has shifted. I am not so like, hey, everybody, read my stuff. I feel like it's not quite right. And it reminds me of my daughters are both artists, like visual artists, and once a piece is more than 5 minutes old, they're like, ah, cringe. And they don't want to look at it. I felt a little of that when I went back and read this story. And then I was like, no, Dana, it's not cringe. It's still good. It's just earlier. Accept it, share it, and just know you've grown as a writer since then. So I love the story. And I love that part of Nico's journey. I mean, she's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Some good kids.
I hope so. We're all counting on them, Lawrence.
Uh,
And before we go, we have a question for you listeners. Lawrence and I have been pondering this, and we want to get your input because eventually we would like to have a definitive guide on this. And the question is, what is the ultimate Gen X song? I know this is pressing news in our political times. We've been talking about this as a question, kind of coming up with parameters, because as we started talking about it, we started tossing songs back and forth, and I found I had rules in my heart. My big rule was it needs to be a song that is universally known by Gen X members of our 15-year span, but it also should mean something unique to Gen X, and it shouldn't be a ubiquitous song. So, for example, Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana could be a great example, but it transcends time. It means something to every generation. Don't Stop Believin' by Journey or Africa by Toto, same. Those songs have taken on lives of their own and are covered and memed and karaokeed. We don't own it. Gen X is a weird little generation. And in our peak years of adolescent, teenhood, young adulthood, there were so many genres and so much freedom of different kinds of music that we can do better than those songs that transcend and are just universal songs in the zeitgeist. That's my point of view. Lawrence, what's your point of view? Because you had other thoughts that I think were also really helpful.
Well, my point of view is that it should be a song that is the moment where you broke away from your parents' taste in music. So something that's kind of emblematic of Gen X forming their own musical awareness and interest and personality. So that's my take. So Dana, what's your song?
I have like five, and I'm trying to decide which one to say
Oh,
first
come
because
on.
they're
We
all
all
very
have like
different.
27. Pick one.
So I'm going to pick an outlier because reasons. I'm going to pick Birdhouse in Your Soul by They Might Be Giants. This is maybe skewing a little younger Gen X and also an alternative Gen X. It's a very Gen Xy song. This is a song beloved by liberal, nerdy, gifted kids of Gen X. It's quirky, it's strange, it's brainy, it's more a metaphor than a straightforward lyric. Blue canary in the outlet by the light switch who watches over you, make a little birdhouse in your soul. And that lyric toward the end of keep the night light on inside the birdhouse in your soul, that is my rallying cry of never losing whatever it is that keeps you happy, weird, and lit up. And I don't think that's a song that many people outside of Gen X really know. It might have the detriment of being a song that not everyone in Gen X actually knows. It's not ubiquitous. But as a first crack at it, that's the song I'm picking, Birdhouse in Your Soul. I wish we could
Okay.
play it right
All
now,
right.
but I think we'd get sued for copyright infringements. We'll
Yeah,
just
yeah,
do
we
that.
don't have the rights to
I
that.
have a secret to tell from my electrical well. Lawrence,
All right,
what's
and
your
that's
song?
it. Fair
That's
use. Go beyond that, or
I know.
it won't hold up in the Supreme Court.
No one will accuse my voice of yeah, I think we're fine. Lawrence, what's your
I'm going to
pick?
go in the opposite direction.
Okay.
So, in keeping with a moment where I heard something that spoke to me directly and that had nothing to do with the music of my parents' generation, I'm going with Corey Hart, Sunglasses at Night.
That's such a good one, Lawrence. I didn't think you were going to say that one.
Yeah, and it is, I think, ubiquitous to Gen X, but not necessarily known beyond the boundaries of Gen X. So this was a song that, when it came out, was absolutely on massive repeat for me. My sister and I both loved it. We would watch MTV, we would watch the video, we'd dance around and sing along to it.
Yep.
Corey Hart was the first concert we went to.
No way.
Yes, it was surprisingly, shockingly, my mom let us get tickets and go to this concert by ourselves. And Corey Hart is my very first concert, and Sunglasses at Night was obviously the peak.
How did I not
The
know
peak.
that was your first concert? And where was it? Was it Sunrise Music Theater, Hollywood Sportatorium? Do you remember?
Okay, dear viewers and listeners, this is where Dana and I are going to reveal ourselves to be very different people. You would remember something like that. I have no freaking idea where it was.
Was it
It
a
was a
big arena?
concert at a place.
What year was it? I'll report back in the next one.
Whatever year the album came out and he did his tour, that that was the year.
When was that? 83, 84? Were we in high school or middle school?
I'm pretty sure we were in middle school. I must have been like 14 or 15 years old.
You were
I'm
not in middle
shocked that.
school when you were 14 or 15 years old, Lawrence.
Oh no, that's true. You.
Hold on.
Um,
Hold on. The internet has the answer. Sunglasses. 1983. It is middle school, eighth grade, or
all
seventh,
right,
depending.
young enough that I'm shocked that my mom let us go to a
Yeah.
concert by ourselves. I'm pretty sure I remember, she dropped us off and we went to the concert. I'm assuming she went shopping or something, and then she picked us up afterwards. But yeah, we were
Wow.
at that concert. Big deal. BFD.
I think that's an excellent GenXy pick, and it definitely was not the Hollywood Sportatorium, Lawrence, because that one was the one that was like a cinder block in the and a bong in the middle of the Everglades. It
Yeah,
held
no,
like
not that one.
I had like a single road going up to it, so it would take like forever to get in, and it was something. We'll have to do an episode about the Hollywood Sportatorium. Rest in peace.
Or not.
I could do an entire episode detailing my first concert.
Yeah, tune in next week as Dana reads the Wikipedia entry for the Hollywood Sportatorium.
No, it would be memoir about my experiences. My first concert, Van Halen at the Sportatorium. We called it the Scumatorium. I think six of us, we were in eighth grade, and Jen McIntyre's mom took six tweeny, teeny girls to see Van Halen in this bong of a sportatorium in the middle of the Everglades. She's my hero. I didn't know it then, but
Good
she's my
times.
hero.
Yeah. So Jen McIntyre's mom.
Hi, Jen.
Right.
If you're
Also, hi,
listening.
Jen McIntyre, if you ever watch this.
Yeah, she has a different name now. Lawrence and I don't get to be the only arbiters of the ultimate Gen Xy song. We welcome you, please. If you have thoughts or opinions, leave them in the comments. You can just write the song if you want, or you can write an entire justification, but all answers will be welcomed and considered. So please tell us what you think the ultimate Gen Xy song is. Lawrence, I think it's time for me to finally go face down the pet vomit in the kitchen that they did right before we started. I don't even know if it was one of the cats or the dog. I just know I have a mess to clean up, and I think it's time for me
Yeah.
to go.
Probably not one of the children, though. So,
No, they're not here. And it's comprised of dog food kibble. I'm guessing it's the orange cat eating the dog's kibble overnight and then being like, oh, I can't digest this. It's a laugh a minute
delicious.
in my house. It's a laugh a minute
All right.
over here.
Well, on that note, love you, mean it. Bye.
Love you, mean it. Bye.